How's it going, guys? Randall aka Shizakats here, and welcome back to the Tressa's Collectibles channel. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a Macross Delta deck that utilizes the very unique Super Dimensional Venus Link strategy. This is one of the most complicated decks Weiss Schwarz has to offer, being difficult to pilot even for experienced players, and we do not recommend this build for players that are brand new to the game. That being said, if you're looking for a deck that can greatly reward high-level play, this might be the deck for you. There's a ton to look at in this deck profile, so let's not waste any time and jump right in. Before we get into the Climax Combos, let's first take a look at the Fly Walküre event, which is a centerpiece of this deck. It's a 1/1 event that cannot be played unless you have a traded character on stage, and when played, can either send itself to memory or draw a card. The first two copies that you get will want to be sent to memory in order to activate its continuous effects. While you have 2 or more copies of this event in memory, all of your Climaxes that have the Super Dimensional Venus Link gain the names of all other Climaxes in your waiting room that also have the Super Dimensional Venus Link. Now, what is this link thing, you might be asking? Think of this like a trait for Climaxes, unique to very specific sets in Weiss Schwarz. Going back to the event, in addition to the Climax name sharing effect, the remaining 2 copies of the event that are still left in your deck become cost 0, allowing you to use them as a 1/0 event that draws a card. Getting 2 events into memory allows you to use multiple different Climax combos within the same turn to get maximum value, making up for the fact that sending 2 copies of this event to memory in the first place is inherently a -2. Fly Walküre also has a level 0 Freya and Mikumo that makes it easier to grab 2 copies into your hand in a timely manner. This card has multiple on-play effects. First, on play if you have another traded character, you can either look through the top 3 cards of your deck for an event, or you can discard a card to bond to a copy of Fly Walküre. Additionally, this also has on-play pay 1 discard a character to look through the top 3 cards of your deck for anything and add it to your hand, which is crucial throughout the mid-game to dig for a Climax to play. So we have a card that allows our Climax in play to share names with any Climaxes in our waiting room. But how are we getting those Climaxes into the waiting room efficiently in the first place? And that's where our level 0 Reyna comes in. This card is a typical rest self-salvage Brainstorm, but also has an extremely powerful effect that only sees use in this specific build. By paying 1 and resting herself, you send all cards in your deck to the waiting room except for the bottom 5. Note that if you do not already have 6 or more cards in your deck, all of the following parts of this effect will not happen. After milling down, you check the number of Climaxes with different names in your waiting room. If you have 4 or more unique names, at the start of the encore step of that turn, you will get to perform a free refresh. However, if you have 3 or fewer names, not only do you miss out on the free refresh, but the Brainstorm sends herself to clock. In order to satisfy the unique names condition for this effect, we are running 6 different Climaxes in this deck. At least 1 of every Climax in Macross Delta that has the Super Dimensional Venus Link. The standard Climax lineup for this type of build is 2 copies each of Axia and Ikanai Borderline to use for our advantage generating combos throughout the early to mid game, and 1 of each of the other 4, a 5th choice, 1 standby, and 2 doors. While all of these Climaxes do have a corresponding character with a Climax combo, those cards don't always make an appearance in these types of decks, and on average, 4 or 5 of the Climax names will actually be relevant for Climax combos in any given list. When counting the number of different names in the waiting room, a quick tip to count quickly is to look for the red Climaxes first. Since all 3 red Climaxes have different names, you don't actually have to check their names. Once you see the 3 red Climaxes plus any yellow Climax, you can rest assured that you have 4 names to fulfill Reyna's requirement. Alright, let's start our Climax combos with the level 1 Kaname and level 2 Mikumo, since they are the backbone of this deck's advantage generation. Kaname is a 1/0 3k with a soul trigger, and she gains 3k power during your turn. Her Climax combo with Axia lets you summon a cost 0 character from your waiting room, standing, to an open front row slot. It also restricts the player from attacking 4 or more times that turn in order to prevent getting more attacks than normal through cards like the 2/0 Messer, which is not a card that is included in this deck. The idea with Kaname is that you can start your attack phase with Kaname as your only front row character, use her effect to summon a second one, and then use the second one to summon a 2/0 Mikumo. Notice how the ability says you summon a cost 0 from Waiting Room, but it does not restrict what level the character has to be. The Mikumo is a mere 2500 base power, but she gains a massive 6000 power during your turn, bringing her up to 8500 without Climax and 9500 with Climax, easily beating over most of the cards present on the board at level 1. Her Climax combo with Ikenai Borderline activates at the start of the Encore step if she is in the front row and the character across from her is reversed, or there is no character across from her at all. Just sacrifice the Climax to the Waiting Room and salvage 2 characters. Very simple. Since both Mikumo's combo and the Reina free refresh happen at start of Encore step, you can choose the order they resolve. So you will want to have Mikumo sack the Climax first so that it goes back into your deck when you do the free refresh. Despite usually being summoned off of the Kaname Climax combo, Mikumo herself does have an early play condition, allowing her to come into play at level 1 all on her own. She gets -1 level in hand if you have either 2 or fewer Climaxes in your Waiting Room, or 5 or less deck, so she can be pretty useful even without having 2 events in memory if you find yourself having both a copy of her and her Climax in your hand. Taking into account 2 Kaname summons and the Mikumo combo salvaging 2, this entire combo setup results in a +3 in card advantage when you consider that playing the Climax is inherently a -1. That being said, you need to have 2 copies of Fly Walküre in memory already to make this double combo work, which is inherently a -2. So the first turn of Kaname and Mikumo combo is only going to be a net +1. But as long as you are able to repeatedly use these Climax combos on future turns, you will eventually be swimming in cards. Our finisher of choice in this deck is Freya, who shares a Climax with Mikumo, Ikenai Borderline. She heals on play, and her Climax combo is on attack, pay 1, discard 1, Mocha 3, and gain 1000 power. This ability does allow you to easily eliminate Climaxes from the top cards of your opponent's deck, making damage easier to stick, but it lacks a high damage ceiling, having no additional damage outside of the 3 attacks. It can be a dangerous finisher if your opponent is already at level 3, but struggles to kill consistently if the opponent is at level 2, at least on her own. Alongside our Freya is a one-of level 3 Freya and Hayate, which has a Climax combo with our one-of Choice Climax. While it has no on-play effect, its Climax combo gives us the choice between 3 powerful options, all of which are free. You can either heal up to 1 and draw up to 1, or you can full Fumio the opponent and gain 5000 power, or you can burn 2. This card is included to give the deck a bit of extra late game pushing power. While many players prefer to use this card as the main level 3 finisher in Venus Link decks, we found that this card is highly susceptible to being pushed to level 3 early, due to having no on-play ability and requiring the Climax combo to heal it all in the first place. Add on to this that the Climax for this card's combo is a one-of, which means that if your 1 copy is in the bottom 5 cards of your deck after milling down with Reina, you might get completely locked out of using your finisher. Per our evaluation, we went with the Freya level 3 as our main finisher combo as a higher floor, lower ceiling option, while still running 1 of the Freya Hayate as a supporting piece. We're also running 1 copy of the level 0 Machina and Reina, which has a Climax combo with the Standby Climax. At the start of the Encore step, we can salvage a character and discard a card, giving us a little bit of extra filtering. They also have a secondary effect that activates when one of our other characters is sent from stage to Waiting Room while this is in our back row, sacrificing itself to bring that other character back to stage rested. This effect is mainly useful for retaining a 1/0 Kaname on board, so you do not have to invest one of Mikumo combo's salvages or a Reina Brainstorm in order to get it back, and you can instead grab something else. Alright, now that we've finally gotten through all of our Climax combos, let's get into the rest of the deck, starting with our level 0s. With how fragile this deck strategy is, we want to run a good number of strong early game profiles to make sure we're on the path to success from as early a point as possible. The headliner of our level 0 suite is this Mikumo. She can't side attack and sits at 1500 base power, going up to 3500 if all of your characters on stage are properly traded. Additionally, at the start of the opponent's attack phase, you can mill the top card of your deck, and if it's a level 2 or lower character, she can bounce back to your hand upon being front attacked. Compared to other cards from other sets with the same ability, such as Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, the extra power makes it significantly stronger if she goes unanswered, since she has good enough offensive power to swing over most level 0s and even some weaker level 1s. It's not uncommon to see copies of this card live for 2 or even 3 turns in a row throughout the early game. Our backup option is the level 0 Freya. She has 2000 base power, going up to 3500 if we have 2 or less stock, and she is a chaser. Compared to Mikumo, she's definitely worse, as tri-fielding will not only cause her to lose her power once we go to 3 or more stock, but also restricts her movement if we have a full front row. Meanwhile, Mikumo is able to use her effect to preserve herself even if your front row is full, making her much more ideal for early game aggression and building stock. Nevertheless, Freya is still a perfectly fine card to use for the first 1 or 2 turns of the game, which is entirely the point of running her. As our follow-up, we have the Mikumo Riki, which has 1500 base power and gains 1000 on offense. The Riki effect, as always, is very strong, allowing you to search your deck for any level 1 or lower character at the cost of 1 stock and 1 damage. Since the card you put into your clock is chosen from your waiting room, you can also use this to manipulate your colors, which can be very important in this deck since your advantage combos are both yellow and the events are red. Skipping ahead in the 0 line, we have Kaname at 1 copy. She is 2000 power and gains 1000 on offense, bringing her up to a solid 3k power line, and has an on-death effect to look through up to 3 cards from the top of your deck to look for a Climax. If you added a Climax to your hand, you discard a card afterwards. This card is the only way to dig for a Climax in the deck without paying any stock, compared to the Freya and Mikumo, which digs 3 on play but requires paying a stock for their ability. That being said, the ability being on death makes it a good bit harder to utilize, and as a result, we're only running the 1 copy as a niche option. That being said, if you open up with this card during the early game, feel free to just plop this down on your board, and on death, you can dig for a Climax that you can eventually use once you hit level 1. Finally, we have the level 0 Machina, which has a very standard vanilla on-play Rico effect. Despite the Rico effect being the only effect on the card, it's still very powerful, offering a free discard outlet, knowledge of the top card of your deck, and semi-selective hand fixing. At level 1, there's only one card we haven't already talked about, and this one is a bit of a spicy one. Yami Machina is a 1/1 with 2 base soul and a very unique on-play effect. You pick 1 random card from your opponent's hand, and they send it to memory until the end of their next turn. If this ability hits the right card at the right time, it can cause absolute devastation. And if you're able to play this card multiple times in the same turn, such as with the 2/1 Mikumo that we'll look at soon, you can rip more than 1 card out of the opponent's hand. Sometimes your opponent's endgame might just be based on having enough cards to pay for costs, and this card could potentially mess up those plans. This card is definitely inconsistent and has a wide range of potential outcomes, but we've included it in our list as a bit of a chaos element, and it's definitely something unique that we rarely see in Weiss Schwarz. If you want something a little bit less spicy, I would recommend replacing this with a copy of the 1/0 Yami Reina. This is a tap self-salvage Brainstorm, which does double up with the Reina Brainstorm that we already run in the deck, but her secondary effect is a pay 1, rest 2, burn Brainstorm for each Climax hit. Utilizing this in the endgame can be a very nice addition to our otherwise low-damage Mocha-based endgame. And before I forget, the Yami Machina also has a 2500 field counter effect, which isn't amazing given how most of our list is extremely low powered defensively, but in theory, it combos well with her 2 base soul so that she can side attack while still dealing damage, and then use the field counter ability when your opponent swings into your board to try to save a character. At level 2, we have the Mikumo Bouncer. On play, you can discard a card to salvage any character from your waiting room, allowing her to serve as a filter. By sacrificing herself from the stage, you can bounce one of your opponent's characters back to their hand. This card is intended to be used against decks with powerful defensive options, such as anti-damage or rest counters, or against decks with exceptionally high defense boards, as you can open a lane up so that the Mikumo level 2 combo can resolve. If needed, you can combine the Mikumo Bouncer with the level 0 Machina and Reina to bounce 2 characters without needing to get the Mikumo back. We also run 1 Reina level assist, She gives characters in front of her 500 times their level, and as an act ability, she can rest herself to send one of your other characters on stage to stock. This can be really useful when playing cards with on-play abilities, such as the level 0 Freya and Mikumo, but you don't necessarily want them to stick around after they use their effect. Let's say you found a Climax off of the Top Check 3 effect, and now you want a completely empty front row to get maximum value out of the Kaname combo. You can use Reina to empty your own board and net you a stock at the same time. The extra power boost from her assist effect should not be understated either, allowing Mikumo to hit 10,500 power on offense with a Climax, which allows her to hit over common power lines at level 2, such as a lot of early play healers or standby 2/2s. Our last level 2 in the list is the Mirage counter. By paying 1 extra stock and sacrificing a character on stage, you can choose an opponent's character and reduce its soul by 1 for the turn. Sacrificing your own character to make the opponent overswing into a direct lane, while simultaneously reducing soul on another lane to make it an underswing, can be extremely effective at keeping yourself alive when on the brink of death. And the sack also gives you the ability to dodge powerful on-reverse finishers at the same time. If you're particularly worried about decks with powerful early play strategies, such as Nazarick with Ainz or Hololive with Kanata, you could play the Freya anti-change backup instead. Alright, and finally we have our level 3s, or at this point just one last level 3 remaining, since the others are the Climax combos that we've already previously discussed. Yami Freya is another supplemental finisher piece with a powerful on-play ability. You can either rest a character to half Fumio your opponent, or you can top check burn 1. This card also has 3 base soul, which can create some really funky situations with the Mocha 3 finisher and side attacks. Okay, now that we've gone over every card in the list, let's talk game plan, finally. Cards that are really important to see in your opener are early game pieces like the Mikumo and Freya level 0s, as well as a Climax, 1/1 events, and at least 1 Reina Brainstorm. Despite Kaname being the main starter card for our level 1 combo play, I prefer to discard it in the mulligan if I open a copy, since we need a copy in our waiting room anyway, so that we can summon it later. Other useful cards are the Mikumo Riki and Makina Riko to help get missing pieces. This would mainly be the Reina Brainstorm if you don't already have one, but grabbing Kaname combo if we didn't already draw into a new copy is also perfectly valid. This deck benefits hugely from going first, since it likely means that you have 2 turns to accumulate stock before hitting level 1, whereas going second, you will likely only have 1 turn before going to level 1. Going into level 1, you ideally want to have at least 3 stock so that you can play double event and use the Reina Brainstorm's ability to go down to 5 cards in deck. As far as color priority goes, you will need to have both yellow and red at level 1 in order to play both your Climax combos and 1/1 events. But yellow should be prioritized first, since you can still play at least 1 type of Climax combo without having 2 events in memory. Playing the mid game with this deck will require a lot of flexibility and practice in order to recognize what lines you're able to go for based on the current state of your deck and waiting room. However, the baseline is pretty much just going to be Kaname, summon Mikumo, sack the Climax, salvage 2, and free refresh. So here are some of the questions that you might want to be thinking about as you play this deck. Do you have the necessary Climaxes already in your waiting room so that you don't need to mill down to 5? And if you don't mill down, do you have a decent number of Climaxes still remaining in your deck so that you have a good chance of canceling your opponent's next set of attacks? If you don't already have the necessary Climaxes in waiting room, but your deck is still full of Climaxes to cancel with, can you come up with a play that doesn't involve milling down? These questions and more will present themselves every single game, multiple times a game, and the answer is going to be different every single time. With that being said, here are some tips to help you navigate the mid game. Oh, but before this first tip, assume that whenever Mikumo level 0 successfully mills a level 2 or lower character, the opponent will side attack her if possible. Fronting her and allowing her to bounce back to the hand only gives the Macross player more options, so a smart opponent should be side attacking her every single time, unless their effect requires an empty slot, such as our own Mikumo level 2. Okay, so for the first tip, if Mikumo level 0s survive throughout your early game, just ride their value as long as you can. As mentioned earlier, sometimes this card will survive 2 or even 3 or even more turns in a row, and having one of these stay alive and get a +1 every single time it lives is much higher value than simply getting a +1 off a single Kaname summon by playing over this. You could instead try to go for a Mikumo level 2 combo in the meantime, assuming your waiting room or deck is in a position that you can early play her. The next tip is in regards to what you salvage off the Mikumo combo. Typically for my first combo turn, I will default to a copy of Kaname level 1 to use next turn, and a copy of the level 0 Freya and Mikumo in case I need to dig for a Climax. Starting from the second combo turn onwards, I will start to look out for endgame pieces like my level 3 Freya combo. For my third tip, you really want to be paying close attention to your stock expenditure when playing this deck. Since the Reina Brainstorm is a 1 stock investment every time you do it, you will likely be spending more stock throughout the mid game compared to other strong decks. When triggering a choice climax, it is often better to send a card to stock rather than salvage to hand, and focus on using other effects like Mikumo's Climax combo to salvage specific cards and get them into your hand. Additionally, playing or triggering a standby at level 2 can be extremely strong, as it saves you 2 stock, bringing out a level 3 character. For my final tip, more than in any other deck, you need to keep track of which climaxes are where, so that you can reliably resolve your Climax combos. If you have multiple climaxes in your hand, you want to be playing the one-ofs if possible, so that they can go back into your deck rotation and contribute to Reina's 4 or more names condition in the future. Holding on to a copy of either of the 2 of climaxes, Axia or Ikanai Borderline, can be advantageous as well, as this would allow you to utilize at least one type of Climax combo without needing to mill additional names out of your deck. Alright, I lied. Here's one bonus piece of advice. If you want to play this deck, you need to go into it knowing that sometimes this deck will just implode on itself. Maybe all of your 1/1 events are on the bottom half of your deck and you can't get to them in a timely manner. Maybe you have 4 climaxes in the bottom 5 cards of your deck and you lose your Brainstorm and triple trigger. Maybe you drew a 1-of name climax for turn and then clocked and drew 2 more 1-of names, making your Brainstorm's mill down effect impossible to resolve properly. There are many things that can go wrong when playing this deck, and sometimes they just have disastrous results. What ultimately makes a good Macross player is not only being able to play past that and find the best ways to recover from a bad spot, but also just have a good enough mental to just not tilt out of your mind playing this deck for multiple games in a row. That's not me though. This deck hates me and I hate this deck. And that's all for this deck profile. As always, if you have any questions, and I'm sure you do, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for our upcoming content. Speaking of which, we have just 2 gameplay videos for this block, but we'll be featuring 2 different versions of this Venus Link deck with different top-ends, and they will be going up against a couple brews from myself and Simu. But until then, this has been Randall aka Shizakats on the Tressa's Collectibles channel, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!